Hey everybody, this is the Drive On Podcast, where we talk about issues affecting veterans after they get out of the military. I'm your host, Scott DeLuzio, and now let's get on with the show. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Drive On Podcast. Now, before we get started, I wanted to take a minute to ask a quick favor from the listeners. The point of the podcast is to help veterans through sharing stories like the one we're about to hear, but it doesn't really help if no one hears a story. So if you wouldn't mind, hit pause for a second and head on over to driveonpodcast.com/subscribe, where you can find links to subscribe and review the show on your favorite podcast app. And if you wouldn't mind taking a second to share the podcast on social media or even directly to a friend who you think might benefit by listening to the podcast, I'd really appreciate it. Okay, so now back to the show. So today my guest is Natalie Sanders. Now, Natalie is an Army veteran, a mother, and a wife to a soldier. She's here to talk about her experience on deployment to Afghanistan and how it compares to being a stay-at-home parent with a newborn at a new duty station while her husband was deployed. This is a rather interesting topic to me personally because my wife and I probably share somewhat similar experiences in that I was deployed just a few weeks after our first son was born. So it'll be interesting to hear another mother's perspective on deployment with a newborn. So without any further delay, Natalie, welcome to the show. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, my name is Natalie, and I am from Irving, Texas, which is a large suburb of Dallas. And I served in the Army for 8 years, and I've been out now for a little over 5 years. And I'm still in the military community because my husband he's active duty, and we have 2 boys. And so right now I am a stay-at-home mom.
Great, yeah, and that's no small job to have either, being a stay-at-home mom. So you mentioned to me earlier through emails back and forth that you wanted to share some of your experience on your deployment to Afghanistan. So why don't we start there?
Okay. I deployed to Afghanistan in 2010, and my husband had actually just come back from his deployment to Iraq. So they were kind of back to back, which was a challenge.
Sure.
And I deployed as a nurse with the 31st Cash, and we were in several different locations. And I ended up spending the majority of my time at Camp Dwyer, which is a Marine camp, and we had a tent hospital where we provided care to mostly Marines, some civilian contractors. We had translators, and it ended up as kind of a humanitarian mission as well because we helped a lot of the locals that would come in after IED blast and all sorts of things. They were brought into where we were for treatment.
Okay. Yeah, so that experience, I actually was in Afghanistan in 2010 as well, which is just coincidence that we happen to be deployed to the same country around the same time. But that experience, with helping the civilians and helping, obviously the military and the civilian contractors and all that kind of stuff, probably. I can't imagine it was an easy experience to handle any of that kind of stuff. But it probably helped, I would imagine, to some extent, help you as a parent later on in life in terms of, dealing with the stresses of being a parent, especially, in the circumstances that you were kind of going through at the time. So now, how does that experience, those experiences that you had in Afghanistan, compare to being a stay-at-home mom with a newborn child? And I imagine it could be drastically different in some respects, but sometimes raising a child can feel like you're in a war zone almost, So, like, how did those two experiences kind of compare for you?
It may sound strange, but I actually think that being a stay-at-home parent was harder than deployment because when you're in the Army and you're told everything that you have to do, right? But then when you become a parent, you don't have a handbook I mean, you can buy and read books, but it's not the same as actually experiencing it. So I actually felt like my time in the military, even on deployment, was easier than being a stay-at-home parent, and especially coupled with the fact that my husband was only there for maybe the first month before he left. Um, can be very isolating having a newborn at home, and not only that, but then not having the support of your partner there with you,
Absolutely.
and also knowing that he's missing out on some milestones,
Hmm.
just things like that, organizing your new schedule around vaccines, doctor's appointments, things like that.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a lot of things that, to a person who's never had a child before that you just don't think about. Like things like the vaccines and the doctor's appointments and the, you know, basic stuff like how to change a diaper. Like prior to having a
Mhm.
kid, I never changed a diaper before. And it was, you know, that was eye opening, for me as well. But what were some of the things that you did to kind of, did you have any sort of support network? Like, were there not necessarily a support network per se, but a group of people maybe that you could see on a regular basis? Like, were there little? I know a lot of times there were like little classes at libraries and things like that, or rec centers and stuff like that, where you can take your kid to and whether it's they're playing music or whatever. You can go there and it's a social experience for the child, but it also kind of serves as a social experience for the parents as well. Were there any things like that were around where you were, or anything like that?
Yes, so we were at Fort Drum at the time, and there were several events that you could go to. They had a story time at the library that was on post, and we would go to different paint classes. Um, there were definitely opportunities to be out and about so that you wouldn't just have to stay home and you could be with other moms. There was a group that met at our community center once a month, and so we would try to make it a point to go to that.
Yeah, and I would imagine, and I don't know this for sure, but I would imagine that most military bases around would probably have something similar to that, where they have some sort of groups for parents to go with their kids and things like that. And probably for a good reason. With spouses being deployed all the time. It's kind of hard to just have them sitting there, having a parent sitting there and not really having any, community or activities going on for them. So I would imagine that that's probably something that other parents could probably look for if they're in a similar situation, feeling isolated, where they can kind of look for that type of thing.
Yes.
Now, from my own personal experience, it was much different speaking to my wife while I was deployed. In episode 9 of this show, if anyone is interested in hearing that side of the story, you can go back to episode 9. I interviewed my wife, and we discussed a bit about our relationship, and so I'm not going to go too much into that there. But what was your relationship like with your husband while he was deployed? While you had that newborn at home, what was that kind of like in terms of communication and other things like that?
We just tried to do video chat as much as we could so that he could talk to our baby. And it was always challenging having that time difference because he was ahead of us in time. And so we would have to kind of schedule it around
Right.
whatever his work schedule was. And sometimes I'd end up staying up late so that I could talk to him or whatever the case was. Um,
Right.
so we tried to communicate as best as we could, and thankfully the video chat would usually work on both ends. Sometimes it would be grainy, but when we could make the
Sure.
connections, we would.
Right. Yeah, I know before I was deployed, I should say, um, I had no idea where we were going to be in the country, what technology we'd have available to us, or anything like that. And I know I sat down and one afternoon and I recorded myself reading a few children's books, like bedtime story kind of things. And I just had a video camera, recorded it, and then my wife was able to play those for our son while I was gone, because we didn't know if I'd even have access to any kind of video chat or anything like that. And where we were, video chatting was we were kind of remote to some extent, and we didn't really have too many computers there that were capable of the video chat too easily. So it was kind of a good thing that I did something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that we ended up doing actually was so my cell phone at the time, so this was back in 2010, I had a BlackBerry cell phone, which makes me kind of feel old at this point saying that I had that. But we had, so on the BlackBerries, there was a BlackBerry Messenger, which was free to text back and forth between two BlackBerries. So my wife and I both had it. And even though I was halfway across the world, we still were able to text each other for free through that. And it just made the communication a little bit more on demand, where we were able to, it wasn't quite as good as a phone call or a video chat or whatever, but we still were able to kind of just, send quick little messages to each other. And I know that helped us all, tremendously, being able to just send little quick notes, just, checking in, just want to let you know I'm doing okay, and that kind of thing. And that was helpful. So interesting to hear how your, kind of relationship was too.
Yeah. One of the things that actually made me decide that I wanted to get out of the military whenever we decided that we wanted to have kids was the fact that when I was deployed and I would be in the tent with the other women that were in my tent, and they would be trying to video chat with their kids or talk to them, and they would lose the connection. And at that point, I just decided I don't want to do that. It was so hard on them emotionally. Sure. So I just decided, you know what? My military career is going to end when we have a family, and my husband can stay in if he wants to, but I know that that's not what I want for our future.
Yeah, and I think that's probably important for you to have seen firsthand how the other women in your tent there were affected by being deployed and being away from their children for such long periods of time, and then being able to make that decision with that kind of evidence there, kind of supporting your decision. Probably a lot easier to make that decision than it would be if you hadn't seen that, I would imagine. Yeah. And so, what other types of things did you guys do? So I know you said video chatting. Was there any way for you guys to kind of like help each other out with things? I know, like, being a new parent, like you said before, you're kind of figuring things out as you go. There's no handbook that you get to kind of figure out what to do with kids. And typically when you have a spouse at home, you can help each other out to try to figure out how to navigate being a new parent. Were you able to kind of rely on that type of communication while your husband was deployed, or was that something that you just sort of had to figure out on your own?
I pretty much just had to figure out everything about being a new parent on my own. I just did. I had a Facebook group that I was in with all of our babies were due in March, and so we would ask each other a lot of questions. So I had that kind of social network online that we all had babies the same age. So we would keep in communication, and then my mom was able to visit and come help me. So that helped a lot because it gave me a little bit of time away, some time to rest, and that way it wasn't just me completely on my own taking care of the baby.
Yeah, and I know, and again, I'm relating this to my own experience, my own family's experience, I should say. I know my wife would spend a lot of time at her parents' house. Sometimes she'd even stay at her parents' house while I was deployed. And for her, it was good to have another set of hands that could help with the baby, so she could catch up on some sleep, because as any new parent knows, you don't really sleep a lot when the baby comes.
Yes, definitely not.
It's just that's a universal thing. I think you just have to accept you're not going to sleep. I actually probably got more sleep on deployment than I did when I was home with the baby.
Yes.
And she also was there, to just my wife was also at her parents' house, I should say, to have another adult to talk to. So it's not just her and this little baby who can't communicate other than crying and things like that. So she was able to have somebody to talk to, and I think that was important for her own kind of sanity, to have that available. But it looks like you had something similar in terms of having your mother, help out, and also through the groups that you were in, that you were able to ask questions to other parents about, basically being a parent and what to do in certain circumstances and things like that.
Yes.
So in terms of let's circle back a little bit to your deployment, because I think we touched on it a little bit, but I feel like there might maybe be a little bit more to that might be kind of interesting in terms of what your job was there, and what you might have done over there. So if you don't mind circling back to that a little bit, what other so you helped, obviously the military, with their injuries, local civilians who might have been injured in IEDs and things like that, and civilian contractors. What was that experience like for you in terms of, had you ever been in a real world, quote unquote, like more real world experience where there was those traumas? I know you can do all sorts of training to kind of learn about all of that stuff, but what was that your kind of first experience of actually seeing the blood and gore, if you will, from actual real life experiences, or do you have other experiences from that prior to your deployment?
I really hadn't been exposed to the things that we saw over there. I don't really think that there's anything that can prepare you for that. I had worked in the hospital at my first duty station, which it was kind of it was less than a year that I was there, and I worked with heart patients. And then as soon as I got to my next duty station, which was Fort Bliss, then we basically started preparing to deploy, but we were mostly concerned with preparing our equipment, setting up tents, making sure we had all the medical supplies, things like that, not really doing a lot of practice, which I don't think you can really practice. They try to give you patients with the fake injuries so that you can treat them and kind of see how the hospital operates in that type of environment, but it's not at all like what it is like when you're actually there.
Right.
And I also had the opportunity to work with our British comrades also in Afghanistan, and I worked in the operating room with them. So when I did that, we would see people basically straight from the battlefield come in, get fixed up as best as those surgeons could do, and then they would transfer them out to where they could get a higher level of care. Okay. So, that was definitely something different. We'd see amputations, pretty severe injuries, and then some run-of-the-mill things too, like appendectomy. Some soldier has appendicitis, they just fix that, and so they can feel better. Sure. But yeah, we saw things that you would probably not see even in a regular trauma unit in the United States.
Right. Yeah, and especially not in the maybe the volume or the concentration of time, that you were there. So if you might be seeing this, on a much more frequent basis than you would anywhere else. Um,
Right.
and so,
We didn't have a lot of days off. You know, it was just kind
right.
of like you'd pretty much work and you'd get a shift off if they could, and but you'd still be on call. So,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Eh, so how did you, so I know a lot of times when people are kind of thrown into a situation like that, they don't really know what to do, or when they don't know what to expect from that type of situation, seeing all of the that bad stuff that you kind of saw, they may not know how to cope with that either. What were some
mhm.
of the ways that you found um, that worked for you in terms of coping to kind of get through the next day, to come back and do it all over again, after seeing that day after day? What were some of the things that you might have done to help you kind of cope and get through all of that?
We had um, an MWR tent, you know, where you could go get cooled off, have a snack, you could watch a movie. I remember watching all of the Big Bang Theory episodes on our time off. Um, you know, communicating with family at home whenever you could get through to make a phone call. And really, I think we had a pretty good support system just with the rest of my the people that I worked with. The soldiers were really great. We had an awesome chaplain that was always there for us. You know, he would you could walk into where he stayed anytime and talk to him about what was going on.
Well, that's good. I know a lot of people who go to war and they experience some of these traumas, whether they're on the battlefield and experiencing them kind of as they're happening, or even as a medical professional who witnesses them, a short time after they first happened. It's still a very traumatic experience to kind of observe that, and even trauma surgeons in the United States who I've spoken to before, not on this podcast necessarily, but just to people who have um, worked in hospitals and dealt with nasty car crashes or gunshots and other things like that, where it's hard to kind of wrap your head around, like this is a person's life, and uh, their life is now in my hands, and like how do I uh, how do I justify, like, am I the right person to even be the person here to do all of this kind of stuff? Like, to some of those people, it's very hard to
Mhm.
do that type of stuff. But it's good. I think that there were those releases there in terms of, like the MWR
Mhm.
tent and other soldiers nearby and the chaplain to speak to. And I think it's important that people recognize that those opportunities are there for them. So should they feel like they are overwhelmed with that type of stress, that they can rely on that type of stuff,
Mhm.
to kind of help them out, and talking to people too. I mean, maybe the other soldiers aren't the right people to talk to, but I'm sure the chaplain is a good place to start. And um, if the chaplain is not qualified to handle whatever it is that you need to talk about, I'm sure there's other steps that can be taken to kind of escalate that if need be. um,
Yes, and a lot of times we didn't get closure as far as we would have our patient and then we would transfer them out. You know, sometimes I would actually go on the ambulance with them from the hospital to the airplane and they'd go with the Air Force nurses, and so we didn't know what happened to them, which can be hard.
right, yeah, that could be, not really knowing, like, after they take off and they go, either they make it to Germany or the United States or
Mhm.
wherever they end up. um, yeah, not knowing what happened to that person is kind of hard too. And I know just from, um, just the work that I do, on a normal basis, like I like to see things through to completion. I
Hmm.
want to be able to finish a job. And if I can't finish a job, I at least want to know, uh, how it turned out in the end. And what's going on with all of that. So that probably is a little bit difficult as well. Um,
Hmm.
Now you said you have two boys now. So the first child was born, while your husband was deployed, and the second child, uh, was he born after? Uh, like, was there any other deployments? I guess I'm trying to say, were there any other deployments going on that, that child was involved in, or was it just the one?
Just the one. Our first child was when my husband, he deployed about a month after he was born. And then our second one, they're a little bit over 2 years apart. So he
Okay.
was home for that one. And the only thing that he's had is just he does TDY, pretty frequently, but
Okay.
it's not as hard. And
Sure.
it is good that he got to kind of see what it was like since he
Yeah.
missed out on a lot of even though it's a different kid, but he didn't have to miss everything like he did with the first one.
Yeah, so that's like almost an identical experience to uh, what we had, because our first two kids are about 2 years apart, 2.5 years or so apart, and so, gosh, that's actually very interesting, especially with the timeline, because it just kind of seems to fit pretty close there. Um,
Hmm.
but but I know, like, when I first got back from Afghanistan, my wife just continued being mom, take doing all the mom things. She didn't just say, okay, he's home, he can handle the kid now, and just kind of walk away and, kind of wash her hands of it, because she had dealt with this for the better part of a year, and she just needed a break or whatever. So she continued being mom, and along the way, she kind of slowly was like teaching me the things that she learned over that year, which to me was extremely helpful, especially under the circumstances of, how when I came back home, my brother was killed in Afghanistan at the same time that I was there, and so
Hmm.
I was going through um, you know quite a bit of issues with that, and so, learning to be a dad on top of all of that was extremely difficult for me. But so my wife was able to kind of help me out with, slowly getting me back into being a dad. And then by the time our second child was born, um, I was ready to kind of jump in from day one of when she was born, to just be dad and just be there and be present with her and everything like that. So, what was your experience like when your husband came back from deployment with your first child, in terms of getting him kind of involved in being dad? Again, with all of that.
I I'm sorry to hear about your brother, by the way. Um, so when my husband came back, I think he probably didn't really know what to expect, and it was kind of like you said, trying to kind of teach him how to do things because it's like you as a mom and as a temporary single mom, you do everything your way. And so then when he would help, it's hard to say, "Oh, you're not doing it right." Just,
Yeah.
because we tend to be maybe a little bit control freaks about our kids and picking out their clothes, changing diapers, simple things, but
Hmm.
it's like, "Oh, you don't know what you're doing." So just kind of gradually adjusting to that was letting him do more and actually feeling comfortable leaving the house with him by himself, even though you're the dad, it's like, okay, can you handle this?
Right.
So,
Exactly. Yeah, and I think my wife had a very very similar experience where, she has her routines, and she does things a certain way, and she does them well that certain way. But if one little thing kind of comes in and disturbs that routine, it kind of throws off the whole process. And so I was that one little thing that would step in every now and again, thinking that I was being helpful, but I really was, in a way, kind of throwing off the whole process. So, it's actually kind of refreshing to know that I was not the only one who was having to play catch up and learn how to be a dad, that way. So, well, it looks like we're actually kind of coming up on time on this episode, but I usually like to ask one final question before we wrap things up about any advice that you would have liked to receive before joining the military. But I'd like to kind of modify this a bit for you and this particular episode. So the final question that I'd like to ask is there any advice that you would give to a new mom who's going through a similar situation where her husband's deployed and she's at home, perhaps by herself, with a newborn, and maybe not necessarily a new mom. It could be a new dad, where the mom is, deploying a short time after, having a child or whatever. A new parent, let's just say,
Okay.
whose spouse is then being deployed. Is there any advice that you would give to them?
I would say just don't stay at home and just be isolated, even though it can be very difficult to get out of the house sometimes with all the things you have to bring, diapers, extra clothes, etc. There's a lot of programs. There's Army Community Service. Some posts, like here, we have a new parent support program. There are classes you can go to. Your chaplain of your partner's unit. There are a lot of resources, and I would just say it's too easy to just stay home and be isolated, but don't do that because it's not good for your mental health. It's better to be around people that are going through the same thing if you can.
Absolutely, and I definitely think that's a great piece of advice. Definitely being around other people, especially during a difficult situation where you might be concerned about your spouse who's deployed, for their safety, and then dealing with all the things, trying to figure out how to be a parent, or even if you've had a child before, figuring out how to be a parent on your own is a difficult thing. And so having other people who are going through that as well around you can only help the situation, I think. So I think that was great advice that you have, for all of that. So, Natalie, thank you very much for being on the show and sharing your information, with us about your deployment, about being a stay-at-home mom with a deployed spouse. Really, really great information. I think it can definitely help other people who might be going through similar situations. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Drive On Podcast. If you want to check out more episodes or learn more about the show, you can visit our website, driveonpodcast.com, or on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Drive On Podcast.